From the nonpartisan Maddy Institute and the California channel at the state capitol, this is a Maddy Policy Brief.
Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. A lack of education and a job can lead to a life of crime. Recently, California's made some historic changes in its corrections system. What impact have those changes had on the state, county, and community levels? We'll ask our guests, Magnus Lofstrom and Brandon Martin from the PPIC. So Magnus, let me start with you first. The California prison population experienced a lot of growth between 1980 and 2006, 700% increase, due to kind of the tough on crime policies that the state had. In the last 10 years, however, the prison population has declined rather dramatically. Why the change?
Well, you're right, there was an explosive growth in the prison population over that period, and we added a lot of prisons. We went from 11 to 33 over that period of time, but even with that essential tripling of the capacity, that wasn't enough to keep up with the population growth. And by 2006, our prisons housed about twice as many inmates as they were designed to be.
We literally were stacking inmates in prisons.
That's right. The bunk beds were everywhere. It was really poor conditions, as you'd expect with that kind of crowding. And the state was sued over these poor prison conditions. And essentially, what was claimed was that they weren't providing adequate health and mental health care to the inmate population. And as a result of these lawsuits, in 2007, a three-judge federal panel was appointed, and 2 years later, in 2009, they ruled that, yes, overcrowding is really the fundamental problem in our prison system that prevents the state from improving conditions, and they ordered the state to reduce the prison population.
Yeah, the state really had no other choice there. They either reduce them or it's contempt of court. The court's going to force it, right?
Yes, it's a federal court mandate here, and it was to reduce it down to 137.5% of the design capacity.
So just hit it for a second. So they're not saying just 100% of design capacity. They'll allow you to go above that by 37.5%. Even then, California had a struggle getting it down to that number.
Oh, absolutely. But it was a big change. That was at that time in 2009, with the capacity that we had at that time, that meant that we had to reduce the prison population by about 41,000 inmates. That's big.
That's a lot of people.
And we did go on a path to actually address that. We implemented a number of measures and reform since 2009. And since that time, we've reduced the prison population by about 41,000.
Well, let's talk about, Brandon, let's talk about some of those ways the state went about reducing the prison and parole populations. What do they do?
Sure. In 2009, the state enacted Senate Bill 678, which created incentives for local probation departments in the counties to decrease the failure of their felony probationers. If they failed, they would normally be sent to state prison. Right. This created an incentive to decrease that sort of number.
And by the way, just as a footnote here for our audience, there's a difference between a state prison and a county jail.
Right.
They're actually they're distinct. It's not a state jail, it's a state prison.
Yes, correct. Okay. And then in 2011, the state enacted Assembly Bill 109, or what we commonly call Public Safety Realignment or Realignment. And this was a sort of large shift in the supervision of non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual offenders from the state to the county sheriff and probation departments.
I'm assuming a lot of those were drug offenses, that kind of thing?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so so we got Prop 47 and we got the realignment.
Yep.
Did they simply shift those inmates from state prison to county jails?
That's a great question. So if you look after realignment went into effect in the first year, the prison population decreases by about 27,000, but at the same time the jail population is increasing by about 9,000. And so on net, there were 18,000 less inmates in state prison or county jail, and so there was an overall decrease.
So what they're doing now, they're not just letting them go free, they're doing electronic monitoring and those other methods?
Yeah, so counties have adapted to that increase by releasing people, but on various types of programs.
All right, so community service, I was reading your report, day reporting, alternative work. I mean, there are things that they're doing, they're just not in jail.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Magnus, crime rates have been at historic lows. I think people are kind of surprised sometimes to learn that, but in 2015 there was an uptick in the crime rate. Is this an aberration or the beginning of a trend?
Well, I think we need to recognize that the crime rates do fluctuate from year to year, and there are a number of reasons behind that. I mean, if there are changes in gang activity, drug markets, economic and social factors, they all impact crime rates, and also how and for how long we decide to incarcerate offenders and what kind of experience they have while incarcerated. Those are also factors that could affect public safety. We are on a long-term decline in crime in California and the nation as a whole. In California, property crime rates have been coming down since, on the long term, trend since 1980 and violent crime since 1990. We saw upticks in 2012, down in 2013, 14, and as you mentioned, 2015.
So the property crimes are going up a little bit in particular.
Well, what we see in 2015 is exactly that. Property crime went up by about 6.6%, but violent crime went up by about 8.4%. A little bit larger, but here's the thing there. We saw a national trend as well.
So it wasn't just California?
It wasn't just California. In fact, there were about 10 other states that saw at least as big of an increase in violent crime as we saw here.
We've only got 30 seconds left, but I want to get this in. What do you think needs to be done to maintain the progress that's been happening so far when it comes to corrections, and how do we overcome the challenges?
Well, I think one big thing is to address the high recidivism rates that we have in California, and one way to do that is to increasingly use evidence-based practices to identify the right kind of programming and services that are needed. We need to look at what the counties, their resources, do they have the right resources to actually implement and deal with these challenges that the state have passed on to them, and make sure that public safety is not on an upward that is being
We'll be
changed.
watching.
Yeah.
We'll be
Yeah.
watching. Well, I want to thank Magnus Lofstrom and Brandon Martin from the PPIC.
For a more in-depth analysis of this and other public policy issues important to Californians, please log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org and click on the Policy Analysis tab.